I died with -$43 in my checking account. My last memory wasn't a comforting montage of my happiest moments. It was the shrill, mechanical vibration of a debt collector's call, buzzing against the dashboard of my soon-to-be repossessed sedan. I worked 3 jobs to pay off the $2 million business loan my fiancé swore would change our lives. It changed mine, all right. It ended it. But then I woke up. 3 years earlier, sitting across from him at a diner, the loan contract resting between our coffee mugs. This time, I'm not signing a damn thing. Death didn't feel like falling asleep. It felt like an anvil sitting on my chest, crushing my ribs inward until the air simply ran out. The stress of the past 3 years had calcified in my arteries. At 28, my heart just gave up. I remember the sharp stabbing pain, the taste of copper, and the cold steering wheel pressing against my forehead. Then came the gasp. My lungs inflated so violently, I choked a loud, ugly sound that tore through the ambient noise of clinking silverware and low chatter. Jesus, Viv, take a sip of water. You're embarrassing me. I blinked. The blinding midday sun was cutting through a greasy window pane directly into my eyes. The smell of burnt coffee and synthetic vanilla assaulted my nose. I wasn't in my freezing car. I was sitting in a vinyl booth at Cooper's Diner, and sitting across from me, looking mildly annoyed and impeccably groomed, was Derek. He tapped a glossy silver pen against the Formica table. Between us sat a stack of freshly printed papers, the top page bearing the bold header, Guarantor Agreement. My hands were shaking. I looked down at them. No calluses from the warehouse night shifts. No burn scars from the weekend bakery prep. My nails were manicured. My skin looked young, hydrated, alive. Vivian, focus. Derek sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. The notary is waiting down the street. We just need your signature on the bottom line. I told you this is the seed money for OmniStream. It's a guaranteed return. 6 months max, and we pay off the principal. I stared at him. The man I had loved. The man I had ruined myself for. In my past life, I looked at this moment as the ultimate act of partnership. I thought I was investing in our future. I took the pen, signed my name, and tied my social security number to a predatory commercial loan. Derek's startup failed within 8 months. He filed for personal bankruptcy, but because of a legal loophole in the guarantor clause, the bulk of the debt fell squarely on my shoulders. When the collections started, Derek packed his bags. He told me I was too toxic to be around, and that he needed space to rebuild his mental health. He left me with $2 million of debt and a broken heart. I died trying to pay for his ambition. Vivian. Derek's voice sharpened, shedding the charming veneer. Are you listening to me? I looked at the pen. Then I looked at the contract. Then I looked at him. Really looked at him. Stripped of my blind devotion, I saw exactly what he was. A mediocre man with a good jawline and an inflated sense of his own genius. No, I said. My voice sounded rusty, unused. But the word hung in the air, heavy and solid. Derek stopped tapping the pen. No. What do you mean, no? We discussed this last night. We agreed. You agreed, I corrected, sliding out of the booth. My legs felt weak, but the adrenaline of simply being alive was rapidly replacing my shock with a cold, terrifying clarity. I'm not co-signing a $2 million loan, Derek. I don't care about OmniStream. I don't care about your projections. His face flushed. The familiar vein in his forehead, the one that usually preceded a tantrum, began to pulse. You can't do this. I've already secured the office lease, pending these funds. My reputation is on the line. You're my fiancé. Not anymore. The words bypassed my brain and came straight from my surviving soul. I reached into my purse, pulled out a $20 bill, and dropped it on the contract. For the coffee, I said. I didn't wait for his reaction. I turned and walked out of the diner. The bell above the door chimed a cheerful, bright sound. The afternoon air hit my face, smelling of exhaust fumes and hot asphalt. I inhaled deeply. It was the sweetest thing I had ever tasted. I was alive, and I was free. The apartment was exactly as I remembered it before the repossession men stripped it bare. Mid-century modern furniture, expensive throw pillows, a large, flat-screen TV. Derek's tastes, funded by my steady salary as a mid-level financial auditor. I didn't waste time looking at the photographs on the mantel. I went straight to the bedroom, pulled my largest suitcase from the closet, and started throwing clothes into it. I didn't bother folding. I just needed to be gone before he realized I wasn't having a momentary lapse in judgment. I was zipping up the second bag when the front door slammed open. "Sigh, Vivian." Derek's voice boomed through the hallway. Heavy footsteps approached the bedroom. He stood in the doorway, his chest heaving, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. "What the hell is this?" "I'm leaving," I said, hauling the suitcase off the bed. "You're having a panic attack," he said, shifting instantly into the condescending therapeutic tone he loved to use when I disagreed with him. "You're scared of the risk. I get it. You've always had a small-town mindset, Viv. You lack vision, but you don't get to throw a tantrum and walk out on us." I stopped and looked at him. A small-town mindset. Right. Because protecting my life savings and refusing to underwrite your delusion makes me narrow-minded. OmniStream is going to disrupt the entire logistics sector, he shouted, dropping the calm act. "You're sabotaging my career because you're insecure." "Your career." I laughed, a harsh, scraping sound. "Derek, you're a junior project manager at Roth Capital. You don't know the first thing about corporate logistics. You read one biography of a tech billionaire and decided you were a genius. If OmniStream is such a sure bet, go get a traditional venture capital loan. Oh, wait, you tried, and they laughed you out of the room." That hit a nerve. His eyes narrowed. "How did you know that?" "Because I lived through the fallout. Because I spent my last days agonizing over the rejection letters he had hidden in his desk." "I'm not stupid, Derek," I said, grabbing the handles of my bags. "Move out of the way. If you walk out that door, we're done," he threatened, stepping into my path. "I'm not taking you back when this takes off. You don't get to ride my coattails. I would rather walk barefoot over broken glass than ride anywhere with you," I said flatly. I pushed past him. He didn't try to stop me physically, mostly because Derek was at his core a coward. He just stood there shouting about loyalty and betrayal as I dragged my bags down the hall, out the door, and into the elevator. I checked into a sterile mid-range hotel downtown. Once the door clicked shut behind me, I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress and opened my laptop. I logged into my bank account. Balance $68,450. My chest tightened. In my previous life, I had drained this account to pay the first few months of the loan's interest before it completely overwhelmed me. Now it was entirely mine. I needed a plan. Leaving Derek was survival, but it wasn't enough. Derek wasn't going to stop. He was obsessed. He would find another way to fund his company, probably through predatory lenders, just like he did in my past life after my money ran out. He would drag himself under, but I knew his type. He would try to take anyone down with him to save face. I needed armor. I needed power. I pulled up the corporate webpage for Roth Capital, Derek's employer. It was a massive investment firm, ruthless and wildly successful. In my past life, Derek complained constantly about the CEO, Gideon Roth. He called him a tyrant, a micromanager, a man with ice in his veins who couldn't recognize true innovation. Translation: Gideon Roth saw right through Derek's bullshit. I clicked on the Careers tab. There was an opening for a senior risk analyst. I was qualified, but more importantly, I had a secret weapon. I knew exactly which 3 major tech startups were going to spectacularly implode over the next 12 months. And I knew which obscure biotech firm was about to get FDA approval and skyrocket in value. I spent the next 6 hours rewriting my resume and drafting a cover letter. I didn't send it to HR. I found the email format for Roth Capital executives and sent it directly to Gideon Roth's chief of staff. My subject line was simple: risk assessment. Why your upcoming acquisition of Vertex Solutions will cost you $40 million. Vertex was a company Roth Capital was quietly planning to acquire. In my past life, it was front-page news when Vertex's accounting fraud was exposed 2 weeks after the acquisition, costing Roth Capital a fortune. I hit send at 3 a.m. Then, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I slept without dreaming of debt. 2 months later, the air conditioning in the Roth Capital building was always set to a temperature that bordered on hostile. I liked it. It kept people awake. It kept them sharp. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of the 40th floor conference room, looking down at the city traffic. I was wearing a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than my first car, a gift to myself from my preserved savings. My gamble had worked. The email about Vertex Solutions had caused absolute chaos. Gideon Roth had halted the acquisition, ordered an independent audit, and found the exact fraudulent ledgers I had warned him about. I was called in for a meeting the next day. I didn't give away my entire playbook, of course. I pitched myself as a meticulously observant analyst who noticed anomalies in Vertex's public filings. Gideon hired me on the spot, bypassing HR entirely. I reported directly to him. The door behind me clicked open. Gideon Roth walked in. He wasn't the boogeyman Derek had described, but he certainly wasn't warm. He was tall, sharp-featured, with dark eyes that always seemed to be calculating the exact value of everything in his line of sight. He looked tired, the kind of deep cellular exhaustion that comes from carrying an empire on your shoulders. "The quarterly projections are in your inbox," I said, turning away from the window. "And you were right about the offshore accounts for the Sterling deal. They were hiding liabilities." Gideon walked over to the massive mahogany table and tossed his tablet onto it. "I usually am. Good work, Vivian." He unbuttoned his suit jacket and sat down, rubbing his temples. "We have a pitch meeting in 10 minutes. Internal venture. One of our junior PMs thinks he has the next unicorn." A cold thrill sparked in my stomach. I knew exactly who it was. "Derek from Logistics," I said neutrally. Gideon looked up, raising an eyebrow. "You know him. We cross paths." I lied smoothly. "I've reviewed his preliminary deck for OmniStream. And it's a house of cards," I said, walking over and taking the seat to Gideon's right. "His supply chain model relies on third-party vendors absorbing shipping costs in exchange for equity. No established vendor will agree to that. His user acquisition cost is completely fabricated. If you fund him, you might as well set the money on fire in the lobby. It would generate more heat." The corner of Gideon's mouth twitched. It was the closest thing to a smile I had ever seen from him. "Brutal." I read the deck. I agree. But his direct manager asked me to give him 10 minutes as a courtesy. Mind if I sit in here? I asked. Gideon gestured to the empty chairs. Be my guest. You can handle the rejection. It'll save me the breath. 5 minutes later, the heavy glass doors opened. Derek walked in. He looked worse than when I had last seen him. The 2 months had not been kind. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his suit looked slightly wrinkled. I knew through mutual acquaintances that after I left, he had turned to aggressive, high-interest private lenders to secure his office space. He was drowning, and this pitch was his life raft. He marched in with his chest puffed out, holding a stack of glossy presentation folders. Mr. Roth, thank you so much for taking the time to... His eyes landed on me. The words died in his throat. He stopped dead in his tracks, his foot catching slightly on the edge of the carpet. He stared at me, then at Gideon, then back at me. His mouth opened and closed like a dying fish. Vivian, he whispered, completely forgetting where he was. What are you doing here? Gideon frowned, looking between us. You two know each other. It wasn't a question. We used to be engaged, I said, clearly my voice ringing off the glass walls. Until 2 months ago, Derek's face went from pale to a dark, ugly red. You work here. How? Ms. Hayes is my lead risk analyst. Gideon said, his voice dropping into a register of cold authority. He didn't like personal drama bleeding into his boardroom. She advises me on where capital goes to die. I suggest you begin your pitch, Derek. You have 8 minutes left. Derek was visibly sweating now. He fumbled with the folders sliding, one toward Gideon, and with a trembling hand, one toward me. He started his presentation. It was painful. Stripped of his usual arrogant confidence, his voice shook. He kept losing his place on the slides. He kept looking at me, expecting me to bail him out, to give him a supportive nod. I just sat there, my face a mask of polite indifference, tapping my pen against the table. When he finally stumbled to the end of his financial projections, the room was suffocatingly quiet. Gideon didn't say a word. He just looked at me. I opened the folder. Derek, I said, keeping my tone perfectly professional. Let's look at page 4. You project a 40% market penetration in the first year. Based on what historical data It's a disruptive model, he stammered, pulling at his collar. The algorithm optimizes routing efficiency by... The algorithm you haven't built yet, I interrupted. According to page 7, you need $2 million in seed capital, just to hire the developers to build the proprietary software. So you're asking Roth Capital to fund a 40% market share projection, based on software that doesn't exist, managed by a team that hasn't been hired, utilizing vendors who haven't signed letters of intent. Derek gripped the edge of the table. That's how startups work. Vivian, it's about vision. He looked pleadingly at Gideon. Mr. Roth, the potential ROI here is massive. We just need the runway. Gideon leaned back in his chair. Vision without execution is just a hallucination. Ms. Hayes is correct. Your numbers are entirely fictional. Your operational model is fundamentally flawed. We pass. Mr. Roth, please. Derek's voice cracked. The desperation was palpable. The private lenders must be breathing down his neck. Just a partial investment. $500,000. I can get the prototype running. The meeting is over, Gideon said, standing up. He didn't even look at Derek anymore. He looked at me. Vivian, my office in 5. We need to go over the Tokyo merger. Yes, sir, I said. Gideon walked out, leaving me alone with Derek. The silence in the room was heavy. Derek stared at the table, his hands shaking. Then he looked up at me, his eyes full of a toxic mix of hatred and panic. "You did this," he hissed, stepping toward me. "You sabotaged me. You told him to say no." I stood up slowly, picking up my tablet. "I didn't have to say a word about you, Derek. Your work speaks for itself. It's garbage. I'm ruined," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I took a massive loan from the Vanguard Group. Short term. If I don't get this funding, they're going to take everything." "That sounds like a you problem," I said, walking toward the door. "Vivian, wait." He lunged forward, grabbing my arm. His grip was tight, desperate. "Please, you have his ear. You can talk to him. Tell him to reconsider. For what we used to have. Please." I looked down at his hand, gripping my sleeve. I remembered the cold steering wheel. I remembered the anvil on my chest. I remembered dying alone because of his greed. I yanked my arm out of his grasp. "Don't ever touch me again," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You chose this bed, Derek. Now you get to die in it." I walked out of the boardroom, leaving him standing alone in the wreckage of his own making. The air conditioning hit my face. It felt fantastic. The fallout from the pitch meeting didn't happen overnight. Corporate implosions rarely do. They start as a slow leak, a subtle hiss of escaping pressure before the structural integrity completely gives way. For 2 weeks, I watched Derek walk the halls of Roth Capital like a dead man on a weekend pass. His suits hung a little looser. He stopped making eye contact with the executive assistants. The manic energy that had fueled his doomed startup was replaced by the hollow, hunted look of a man who knew the wolves were circling. I didn't pity him. My pity had died in a cramped sedan with negative $43 to my name. My role under Gideon Roth was expanding rapidly. He didn't offer compliments, but he gave me something far more valuable access. I was suddenly sitting in on closed-door strategy meetings, reviewing confidential mergers, and analyzing the raw, unedited financial ledgers of our largest competitors. I was thriving in the high-stakes pressure cooker. Then came a rainy Tuesday in late October. I was at my desk, cross-referencing a set of quarterly reports, when Gideon's personal secretary tapped on my glass door. She didn't speak. She just handed me a stiff, cream-colored security pass and pointed toward the private elevator that led to the basement parking garage. 20 minutes later, a black town car deposited me at the reinforced iron gates of Gideon's private estate, 30 miles outside the city limits. The property wasn't flashy. It was fortress-like, built from slate and heavy timber, sitting on 50 acres of dense woodland. Gideon was waiting for me on the covered back patio. He wore dark jeans and a heavy wool sweater, looking remarkably human without the armor of a tailored suit. But the air around him was tightly coiled. Sitting perfectly still at his left side was a massive, dark sable German shepherd. The dog didn't bark as I approached, but its amber eyes tracked my every movement with unnerving precision. "Sit down, Vivian," Gideon said, gesturing to a heavy cedar chair. I sat. The dog's ears twitched, locking onto the sound of leather scraping against wood. "This is Knox," Gideon said, noticing my gaze. "Retired Navy K-9, specialized in explosive detection and personnel apprehension. He doesn't like sudden movements, and he doesn't like strangers. But he trusts my read on people. Let him sniff your hand." I held my hand out slowly, palm down. Knox stepped forward. His movements were incredibly controlled, completely devoid of the chaotic energy of a normal pet. He pressed a wet nose to my knuckles, inhaled deeply, twice, and then returned to Gideon's side, resuming his rigid sit. "I brought you here because the office is compromised," Gideon said, cutting straight to the point. He slid a thick manila folder across the patio table. "Open it." I flipped the cover back. The first document was a standard legal summons. My eyes scanned the boilerplate text until they hit the bolded subject line. It was a formal notice of intent to place a corporate lien. The claimant was Vanguard Group, the high-interest private lender Derek had mentioned. Vanguard is claiming that Roth Capital is legally liable for a $2 million default on a short-term commercial loan taken out by one of our employees. Gideon said, his voice deadly quiet. Specifically, they claim the employee presented verified documentation that our firm was underwriting the debt as the primary guarantor. My stomach dropped. The cold, familiar dread of my past life clawed at my throat. Derek, Gideon confirmed. He took the loan out 6 weeks ago. The principal was due yesterday. He missed the payment. Vanguard triggered the default clause this morning. According to their legal counsel, Derek secured the funds by leveraging our corporate collateral. That's impossible, I said, my mind racing. A junior project manager doesn't have the signatory authority to bind the firm. Vanguard's compliance department would never clear a loan of that size without direct verification from our executive board. They wouldn't, Gideon agreed. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, unless the verification came from someone who did have that authority. Turn to page 4. I flipped the pages. My breath caught in my lungs. It was a digital copy of a guarantor agreement, the exact same type of predatory contract Derek had tried to force me to sign at the diner. But this one didn't have my name listed as the personal guarantor. It listed Roth Capital. And at the bottom of the page, executing the agreement on behalf of the firm, was a signature, Vivian. My title was listed as Senior Executive of Risk Management. The silence on the patio was absolute, save for the steady patter of rain against the slate roof. I stared at the ink. It was a perfect forgery. Every loop, every sharp angle of my handwriting had been replicated flawlessly. He forged it. I whispered the words, tasting like ash. He forged my signature to rob your company. Vanguard transferred the $2 million into a holding account, controlled by his LLC, Gideon said. He likely burned through half of it, trying to secure his office space and vendor contracts before I shut him down in the boardroom. Now the money is gone, the loan has defaulted, and Vanguard is coming after my firm to collect. They have a signed contract from my lead analyst. I looked up. Gideon's dark eyes were unreadable. He wasn't accusing me, but he wasn't comforting me either. He was a man who lived by data, and right now the data pointed to a massive, catastrophic betrayal from within his own inner circle. "You think I signed this?" I said, my voice steadying, hardening into something cold and sharp. "I think the signature matches yours exactly," Gideon replied. "I think you have a documented personal history with the man who took the money, and I think $2 million is a very compelling reason to help an ex-fiancé pull off a corporate heist." Knox let out a low, rumbling growl, sensing the sudden spike in tension. I left him because I refused to sign this exact contract with my own money, I said, leaning over the table, ignoring the dog's warning. He is a parasite. He tried to drain me dry, and when I cut him off, he decided to use the access I earned to drain you instead. I didn't sign this, Gideon. I would burn my own hand off before I ever tied my name to his debts again. Gideon stared at me for a long, calculating moment. The rain fell harder. "Prove it," Gideon said softly. I didn't sleep for the next 48 hours. Gideon gave me full, unrestricted access to the company's internal server logs and security mainframes. I locked myself in a windowless conference room in the basement of the Roth Capitol building. My only company was a steady rotation of black coffee and the harsh blue light of 3 computer monitors. If this were my previous life, I would have panicked. I would have dissolved into tears, overwhelmed by the sheer injustice of being framed. I would have waited for a lawyer to save me. But the woman who would have done that died in a freezing sedan. The woman who came back was a weapon. Derek thought he was clever. He knew I had the authority to clear financial risk. He knew my handwriting because we had lived together for 3 years. He had taken an old discarded document I had signed at home, perhaps a lease agreement or a shared utility bill, scanned it, and digitally overlaid the signature onto the Vanguard contract. But Derek was a logistics guy, not a forensic auditor. He didn't understand the invisible footprint every digital action leaves behind. I started with the timestamps. The Vanguard contract was allegedly signed and submitted on a Thursday at 2:14 p.m., exactly 3 weeks prior. I pulled up my own employee keycard swipe logs. On that Thursday at 2:14 p.m., I was on the 40th floor, locked in a closed-door meeting with Gideon and the head of human resources discussing corporate severance packages. I couldn't have physically accessed a terminal to execute the digital signature. It was a good start, but circumstantial. I needed a smoking gun. I needed to prove he did it. I dug into the internal network traffic. Derek worked on the 12th floor. If he routed the forged document to Vanguard, using the company network to make the IP address look legitimate, there would be a trace. My eyes burned as I scrolled through thousands of lines of encrypted packet data. Hours blurred together. My back ached, a phantom reminder of the physical labor I used to perform just to keep Derek's head above water. The memory fueled me. I drank another cold coffee and kept typing. At 3 a.m. on the second night, I found the anomaly. A data packet had been routed through a proxy server located in the building's sub-basement IT closet. Someone had tried to mask their internal IP address before sending an encrypted PDF to an external domain, Vanguard's legal department. I traced the proxy setup back to its origin point. Terminal 12, B. Derek's assigned workstation. A fierce, vicious smile spread across my face. Got you. But I didn't stop there. I wasn't just going to clear my name. I was going to bury him so deep he would never see daylight again. I bypassed his workstation security protocol, a glaring violation of company policy. But Gideon had given me carte blanche and mirrored his hard drive. Derek was sloppy. He hadn't wiped his local cache. Sitting in a hidden, unnamed folder, buried inside his temporary internet files, was the raw, unedited scan of my signature. Next to it was a trial version of a PDF editing software, downloaded exactly 1 day before the Vanguard contract was submitted. And then I found the final nail in the coffin. It was an email draft, saved, but never sent, addressed to a man named Cole, an independent contractor known for corporate espionage and data brokering. Cole, the Vanguard funds cleared. I need you to scrub the proxy logs on the 12th floor by Friday. Roth's new analyst is a bloodhound. If she audits my terminal, I'm dead. Payment will be wired from the LLC tomorrow. He hadn't sent it, probably because Vanguard had drained his LLC account to cover the missed principal payment before he could pay the cleaner. Derek's own incompetence had trapped him. I compiled the evidence. The keycard logs, the IP routing, traced the raw signature file, the software download history, and the damning email draft. I organized it into a pristine 50-page forensic dossier. I printed 2 copies. They were warm from the printer. They felt heavier than the guarantor agreement he had tried to force on me at the diner. This was the weight of true accountability. I walked out of the basement. The building was empty and silent in the pre-dawn hours. I took the elevator up to the 40th floor. Gideon was in his office. He hadn't gone home either. He was standing by the window, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, looking out over the sleeping city. I walked in and dropped the dossier onto his mahogany desk. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. Terminal 12, B. I said, my voice, raspy but steady. He used a proxy server to mask the IP, but left the raw forgery files in his local cache. He acted alone. The timeline of his digital movements proves I was on another floor when the document was transmitted. It's a slam dunk for corporate fraud, identity theft, and wire fraud. Gideon slowly turned around. He looked at the thick binder, then up at me. His expression didn't change, but the cold, calculating edge in his eyes softened just a fraction. He walked over, opened the cover, and spent 10 minutes reading through my executive summary and the attached data logs. He didn't skim. He absorbed every detail. When he finally closed the folder, he looked up. You didn't just prove your innocence. You handed me the exact legal ammunition I need to sever Vanguard's lien and send this idiot to federal prison. He thought he could use me as a shield, I said, leaning against the doorframe, suddenly overwhelmed by bone-deep exhaustion. He thought I was still the woman who would take the hit for his mistakes. Gideon picked up his glass. He walked over to a crystal decanter on his side table and poured a second glass, holding it out to me. You aren't that woman, Gideon said quietly. I knew at the moment you walked into my boardroom and tore his business model apart. I just needed to see how far you were willing to go to defend your ground. I took the glass. The whiskey burned on the way down a sharp, clean heat that chased away the chill of the basement. What happens now? I asked. Now, Gideon said, a dark, predatory smile touching the corners of his mouth. We let him think he got away with it, just for a few hours. I want him to walk into the building tomorrow morning thinking he outsmarted us both. The trap was sprung at precisely 10 a.m. on a Friday. I was sitting at the head of the conference room table on the 12th floor. The glass walls were frosted, cutting off the view of the open-plan bullpen outside. Next to me sat Gideon, his posture relaxed completely, in command. On his other side was Brent Roth Capital's lead corporate litigator, a man who looked like he chewed gravel for breakfast. The door opened. Derek walked in, holding a tablet, looking irritated. I was told there was a mandatory project review, he said, stopping short when he saw the three of us. The irritation instantly melted into a pale, rigid panic. His eyes darted to me, then to Gideon, then to the lawyer. What is this? Sit down, Derek, Gideon commanded. It wasn't a request. Derek's legs seemed to give out. He practically fell into the chair opposite us. He clutched his tablet to his chest like a shield. Brent didn't waste time. He slid a thick stack of papers across the table. It wasn't my forensic dossier. It was a formal termination notice stapled to a civil lawsuit filed by Roth Capital and a copy of a police report. Effective immediately, your employment at Roth Capital is terminated with cause. Brent stated, his voice a flat mechanical drone. You are being sued for corporate malfeasance, intellectual property violation, and damages resulting from fraudulent misrepresentation. Furthermore, we have forwarded a comprehensive evidence packet To the district attorney, regarding your forged execution of a Vanguard Group guarantor agreement. Derek stared at the papers. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking like a wax figure left out in the sun. You can't. He finally choked out his gaze, snapping to me. Vivian, tell them you signed it. We had a deal. You promised to help me back the loan. I just looked at him. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel betrayal. I just felt a profound, overwhelming disgust. There was no deal, Derek. I said, my voice calm and perfectly level. I told you at the diner I wouldn't underwrite your delusion. So you stole my signature and tried to destroy my career to save your own skin. Did you really think I wouldn't find the proxy logs on Terminal 12B? He flinched, as if I had struck him. You audited my terminal. That's illegal. That's a breach of privacy. You committed wire fraud on company hardware. Gideon interjected, his tone laced with absolute disdain. You have no privacy. You have nothing. Please, Derek begged, his arrogant facade completely shattering. Tears actually welled up in his eyes. He leaned over the table, clasping his hands together. Mr. Roth, I can fix this. Just give me time. The Vanguard loan, they're going to seize everything. They'll take my car, my apartment. They'll bankrupt me. I'll go to jail. Yes, Gideon said simply. You will. Vivian, please. Derek turned his desperate pleading to me. I did this for us. I wanted to build an empire for us. I panicked. I made a mistake. You know me. You know I'm a good person. Don't let them do this to me. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. Even now, at the absolute end, he was trying to manipulate my empathy. He was trying to summon the ghost of the woman who had died, working 3 jobs to pay his debts. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. I looked directly into his panicked, pathetic eyes. The man I knew is a coward who drains the life out of everyone around him. I said quietly, You aren't going bankrupt because of me, Derek. You're going bankrupt because you are entirely, fundamentally worthless without someone else's money to burn. Vanguard is going to take your car. They're going to take your apartment. And whatever is left, Brent is going to take in civil court. I stood up. I didn't want to be in the same room as him anymore. The air felt contaminated. We're done here, Gideon said, rising smoothly to his feet. Building security is waiting outside. They will escort you to your desk to collect your personal effects. You have exactly 5 minutes before they physically remove you from the premises. If you ever contact Ms. Hayes or set foot within 500 yards of a Roth Capital property, again, I will personally ensure your bail is denied. Derek buried his face in his hands, letting out a wretched sobbing sound. It was the sound of total collapse. I turned and walked out of the conference room. 2 burly security guards were already standing by the door. They stepped aside to let me pass. Gideon followed me out. We walked down the hallway in silence, leaving the sound of Derek's ruin behind us. When we reached the private elevator, Gideon hit the button. We stood side by side, watching the digital numbers count down. The adrenaline of the confrontation was fading, leaving a strange, quiet peace in its wake. He's going to lose everything, Gideon said softly, not looking at me. I know, I replied. Does it bother you? I thought about the dark, freezing interior of my old sedan, the final crushing pain in my chest, the suffocating weight of $2 million that wasn't mine. No, I said truthfully. It feels exactly like justice. The elevator doors chimed and slid open. Gideon stepped inside, then turned back to look at me. The harsh corporate lighting cast sharp shadows across his face, but his eyes were warm. It was a look of complete, unvarnished respect. "I have a dinner reservation at 8. Gideon said, his voice dropping slightly, shedding the armor of the CEO and leaving only the man. "To celebrate a successful liquidation of a liability. You should come." I looked at him, the man who had given me the tools to save myself. A man who understood the value of ruthlessness when survival was on the line. I stepped into the elevator. "I'd like that," I said. The doors slid shut. The descent began, but for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I felt like I was rising. The restaurant Gideon chose didn't have a sign. It was hidden behind a heavy, unmarked oak door in an alleyway off the financial district, an exclusive sanctuary for people who considered a $1,000 bottle of wine a casual Tuesday expense. The lighting was impossibly dim, pooling only over the center of the heavy mahogany tables. It smelled of aged leather roasted marrow and quiet, expensive power. We sat in a corner booth. The waiter poured a deep, inky Cabernet and vanished without a sound. In my previous life, a place like this would have terrified me. I would have spent the entire meal calculating the cost of the appetizers, mentally subtracting the amount from my grocery budget. I would have worried about using the wrong fork. Tonight, I picked up my glass, by the stem, took a slow sip, and let the complex peppery heat settle in my chest. "Brent filed the injunction against Vanguard this afternoon," Gideon said, cutting into a rare steak. "He used your forensic packet as the primary exhibit. Vanguard's general counsel took one look at the proxy server logs and the forged digital cash and immediately dropped their claim against Roth Capital. They know they can't pierce our corporate veil with a forged document," I said, setting my glass down. "But they still have a $2 million hole in their ledger. They aren't just going to write that off." "No," Gideon agreed, his dark eyes catching the flicker of the table candle. "They aren't. They turned their entire collections division loose on Derek at 3 o'clock today. I had Brent monitor the filings." I leaned back against the plush leather. The mechanics of debt collection were a language I unfortunately spoke fluently, but experiencing it from the top of the food chain, watching the machine devour someone else, felt entirely different. "They'll freeze his personal accounts first," I murmured, staring at the candle flame. The Vanguard contract had a standard cross-collateralization clause. They don't just take his business assets. They take everything tied to his Social Security number. "They already did," Gideon said, his voice flat, completely devoid of sympathy. "Brent reported that a hold was placed on his checking and savings accounts by court order. The LLC he set up to receive the funds was drained immediately, but he had already spent $400,000 on non-refundable vendor deposits and a commercial lease. The remaining balance was applied to the principal. He still owes them $1.6 million plus penalties, plus an aggressive daily interest rate." A cold shiver, a phantom memory of my own past bankruptcy, whispered down my spine. I remembered standing at a grocery store checkout, my card declining, for a $6 gallon of milk, the cashier looking at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. I remembered the suffocating terror of knowing the money was simply gone, and the debt was still there, growing like a parasite in the dark. "He'll try to liquidate his apartment," I said. "But he leased it. He doesn't have equity. He financed the car. He doesn't own the title." "Vanguard knows that," Gideon said. He set his knife down and looked at me, studying my face. "They sent the repossession teams to his building an hour ago. They're seizing his electronics, his furniture anything of value to auction off against the debt. He's being evicted by the end of the month for violating the criminal conduct clause in his residential lease. He is, for all intents and purposes, entirely erased. I took another sip of wine. It tasted better than the first. "You're quiet," Gideon noted. "Most people would be gloating or feeling guilty." "I don't feel guilty," I said honestly. "Guilt implies I had a hand in his destruction. All I did was refuse to be his collateral. Derek built the guillotine, put his own neck in the block, and pulled the lever. I just stepped out of the way of the blade." Gideon smiled. It was a slight, dangerous curve of his mouth, but it reached his eyes. "You have a ruthless streak, Vivian. I didn't see it when you first walked into my office. I just saw a very competent analyst. Poverty makes you ruthless," I replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Or it kills you." I decided I wasn't going to die. "Good." Gideon reached across the table, his large, warm hand lightly brushing my knuckles. It was a brief, grounding touch, completely devoid of the cloying, performative romance Derek used to weaponize. It was an acknowledgement, an alignment. Roth Capital needs people who refuse to die. We're acquiring a distressed shipping conglomerate out of Singapore next month. Their books are a mess. I want you running point on the audit. You'll take a promotion to Director of Risk Assessment. Effective tomorrow. I looked at the man across from me. He wasn't a savior. I didn't need a savior anymore. He was a kingmaker, and he had just handed me a crown I had forged myself. "I'll need a dedicated team," I said smoothly, shifting instantly into negotiations. 3 junior analysts of my choosing, and a 20% bump in base salary. 10%, Gideon countered, his eyes gleaming with genuine amusement. And a performance bonus tied to the Singapore acquisition. 15, I said. "And I picked the analysts." Gideon raised his glass. "Done." The clink of the crystal was sharp and clear. The sound of a closed deal. The sound of a future I actually wanted to live. The high lasted for 3 weeks. The Singapore audit was brutal, demanding 12-hour days and endless streams of data parsing. But I loved it. I loved the friction of complex problem solving. I loved the weight of Gideon's trust. I loved walking into the Roth Capital lobby every morning and seeing my name on the digital directory under the executive tier. I had almost forgotten what Derek looked like. Then came the first Tuesday of November. The city had turned bitterly cold overnight, the wind slicing through the concrete canyons, carrying the sharp bite of impending winter. I left the building at 7 in the evening, my wool coat pulled tight against my neck, heading toward the private garage where my newly purchased sedan was parked. I didn't hear him approach. I smelled him first. It was a sharp, sour scent of stale sweat, cheap alcohol, and damp fabric. I turned my hand instinctively, dropping to the heavy brass keychain in my pocket. Derek stepped out from the shadow of a concrete pillar. I actually took a step back, my brain struggling to reconcile the man standing in front of me with the arrogant, meticulously groomed executive I had left at the diner months ago. He looked ruined. His face was hollow, the skin sallow, and deeply lined around his eyes. He hadn't shaved in days. He was wearing a thin, wrinkled windbreaker over a faded sweater, entirely inadequate for the biting wind. He was shivering, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Vivian," he croaked. His voice sounded like sandpaper scraping against dry wood. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I stood perfectly still, my feet planted firmly on the cold pavement. "You shouldn't be here." "Derek," I said, my voice projecting calm authority. You have a restraining order prohibiting you from coming within 500 yards of this building or my person." He flinched at the clinical tone. I know. Just, please, 5 minutes. Let me talk to you for 5 minutes." "There is nothing to talk about." I took my phone out of my pocket, my thumb hovering over the emergency dial icon. "They took it all." He blurted out the words, tumbling over each other, in a desperate, frantic rush. "Vanguard. They took my car. They seized the apartment. They took my watch, my computer, my clothes, everything. I'm sleeping on my brother's couch, and he's kicking me out on Friday because Vanguard is garnishing my wages from the warehouse job I just got. A warehouse job. The irony was so thick, it practically choked the cold air between us. I had worked warehouse night shifts to keep us afloat, while he networked at expensive bars. That is the legal consequence of stealing $2 million, I said flatly. But Roth Capital is still suing me, he cried. Taking a step forward, he pulled a crumpled, rain-spotted piece of paper from his pocket. It was a legal summons. Brent filed a civil suit against me for corporate damages. $700,000. Vivian, I don't have $7. I'm drowning. If I declare bankruptcy, the Vanguard debt won't be discharged because it's tied to criminal fraud. I will be paying this off until the day I die. Yes, I agreed. You will. He stared at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot, searching my face for a flicker of the woman who used to love him, the woman who used to solve his problems. He found nothing. How can you be so cold? He whispered, a tear tracking through the grime on his cheek. We were going to get married. We built a life together. You're just going to stand there and watch them destroy me. You destroyed yourself. My voice was a low, steady hum over the roar of the city traffic. You didn't care about our life together when you forged my signature. You didn't care that if Vanguard had accepted that contract, I would be the one sleeping on a couch. I would be the one facing federal charges. You traded my life for your ambition without a second thought. I panicked, he screamed, his voice cracking, echoing against the concrete walls of the parking structure. I needed the runway. If you had just supported me at the diner, none of this would have happened. Even now, even at the absolute bottom of the abyss, it was my fault. The last microscopic fragment of pity I might have harbored for him evaporated, leaving nothing but cold, sterile air. You are a coward, I said, enunciating every syllable. You possess no actual talent, no real grit, and absolutely no integrity. You masqueraded as a businessman, but you were just a parasite, looking for a host. You tried to bleed me dry. Then you tried to bleed Gideon dry. But you miscalculated. You picked people who bite back. He lunged toward me. It wasn't a calculated attack. It was a spasm of pure, impotent rage. He reached for the lapels of my coat. Before his fingers could even brush the wool, a massive shadow detached itself from the gloom behind him. A low, vibrating snarl ripped through the air, vibrating off the concrete. Derek froze, his hands suspended in midair. He slowly turned his head. Knox Gideon's massive, dark sable German shepherd was standing 3 feet behind Derek. The dog's ears were pinned flat against his skull, his teeth fully bared, exposing wet, gleaming fangs. The sheer, coiled violence radiating from the animal was terrifying. Back away, a voice commanded from the shadows. Gideon stepped into the dim overhead light. He was wearing a dark overcoat, his hands casually resting in his pockets. He didn't look angry. He looked entirely indifferent, which was infinitely worse. Derek stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet, landing hard on the cold pavement. He scrambled backward, his eyes fixed on the dog in sheer panic. "You violated the restraining order." Gideon stated his voice, perfectly level. "My security team already called the police. They will be here in approximately 90 seconds. You are going to be arrested for violating a court order, and I will ensure the district attorney files additional charges for attempted assault." "I didn't touch her," Derek sobbed, sitting in the dirty water of a puddle, holding his hands up defensively against the dog. "I just wanted to talk." "You don't get to talk to her anymore," Gideon said. He walked past Derek, not even sparing him a downward glance, and stopped next to me. He looked at my face, assessing my reaction. I wasn't shaking. My breathing was steady. I looked down at the pathetic broken man crying on the ground, and I felt nothing at all. "Are you okay?" Gideon asked quietly. "I'm perfectly fine," I said. In the distance, the shrill wail of a police siren began to cut through the night air, growing louder, closer. The exact same sound that used to signal my own financial death in another life. Now it was just the sound of the trash being taken out. "Let's go home," Gideon said. He didn't mean his estate. He meant my new apartment, the one overlooking the river, paid for with my own money, secured by my own talent. "Okay," I said. I turned my back on Derek. I didn't look over my shoulder when the flashing red and blue lights illuminated the concrete pillar. I didn't listen to his frantic shouting as the officers pinned him against the hood of the cruiser. I simply walked to my car, got in, and drove away. 6 months later, the world was green again. Spring had hit the city with a sudden, violent burst of life. The trees lining the avenues were heavy with fresh leaves, and the air smelled of rain and hot asphalt. I sat at my desk on the 40th floor of the Roth Capitol building. My office was larger now, corner suite, floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of the financial district. My desk was organized chaos, spreadsheets, risk assessments, and legal briefs regarding our latest European acquisition. The internal phone line buzzed. I hit the speaker button. The final filings for the Derek insolvency case came across my desk. Brent's gravelly voice filled the room. "Thought you'd want the closure. Go ahead," I said, leaning back in my ergonomic chair, picking up a silver pen and twirling it between my fingers. The bankruptcy court officially denied his petition for Chapter 7 discharge regarding the Vanguard debt, Brent reported, because the origin of the debt was proven in criminal court to be fraudulent. Thanks to your proxy server logs, it is permanently attached to him. He pleaded guilty to felony wire fraud to avoid a trial. The judge gave him 3 years probation, considering it a white-collar, nonviolent first offense, but the financial penalties hold. His wages will be heavily garnished for the remainder of his natural life. He currently works the graveyard shift at a regional sorting facility. A sorting facility. Logistics. I suppose he finally got the career in logistics he always wanted, just from the bottom of the ladder, wearing a high-vis vest and a back brace. "And our civil suit?" I asked. "We secured a default judgment for $750,000. Brent said, sounding vaguely amused. "He didn't even show up to court to contest it. He's a ghost, Vivian. Mathematically, financially, and legally, he ceases to exist in any capacity that matters." "Good work, Brent. Close the file. Send it to the archives." "Will do. Have a good weekend, Director." The line clicked off. I sat in the quiet of my office. I looked at my hands. They were steady. The heavy, crushing anvil that had sat on my chest since the moment I woke up in that diner all those months ago was gone. The air in my lungs was clean and light. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking down at the sprawling, chaotic machinery of the city. In my past life, that city had eaten me alive. It had chewed me up and spit me out into a freezing car, with a negative bank balance and a failing heart. I had been weak. I had confused love with martyrdom. I had believed that if I just worked hard enough, if I just sacrificed enough of myself, the man I loved would eventually succeed and save us both. I knew better now. Nobody saves you. You save yourself. The door to my office opened. Gideon walked in. He wasn't wearing a tie, his collar open, looking relaxed, despite the fact that we were in the middle of a billion-dollar merger. Knox padded in behind him, immediately walking over to my desk and dropping heavily onto the carpet with a satisfied sigh, claiming his spot. The European regulators signed off on the shipping deal. Gideon said, leaning against the doorframe, watching me with that familiar, intense focus. Your risk assessment was flawless. We close on Monday. I told you they were bluffing about the carbon tax penalties, I said, turning away from the window to face him. You did, he acknowledged. He pushed off the doorframe and walked toward me, stopping inches away. He reached out his thumb, gently tracing the line of my jaw. It was a gesture of profound intimacy, grounded in months of shared battles, late-night audits, and the quiet, solid comfort of understanding each other completely. We weren't a fairy tale. We were a strategic alliance that had evolved into a deep, unshakable partnership. We were two predators who had decided to share the same territory, and the results were magnificent. We have a reservation at 8, Gideon said, softly. The place by the river, the one you like. I have 3 more reports to review, I said, even as I leaned slightly into his touch. They'll be here on Monday, Gideon replied. He dropped his hand and offered me his arm. Leave the work, Vivian. We won. It's time to enjoy the spoils. I looked at the stack of papers on my desk. Then I looked at the man standing in front of me. Strong, brilliant, and completely dependable. I looked at the dog sleeping peacefully by my chair. I looked at my own reflection in the dark glass of the window. I saw a woman who was alive, a woman who was rich, powerful, and absolutely free. I grabbed my coat. Let's go, I said. We walked out of the office together, leaving the lights off and the door locked. The ledger was finally balanced. The debt was paid, and the future was entirely mine to spend. And that brings Vivian's incredible journey of revenge to an end. She didn't just survive Derek's ultimate betrayal. She completely rewrote her destiny, outsmarted the system, and left him drowning in the very debt he tried to force on her. Vivian is the definition of a boss, building her own empire, and finding a true partner in Gideon along the way. What was your favorite moment of her payback? Let us know in the comments. If you love this deeply satisfying story of corporate karma, hit that like button, share the video, and subscribe for more epic tales.